Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Know If Your Job Search webinar series. My name is Linda, and I am the marketing specialist here at Jobscan. If you are not familiar with Jobscan by now, we are a Seattle-based company dedicated to building the best online tools for job seekers. This year is actually our second year of doing the Know If Your Job Search webinar series, and no matter where you're at in your job search today, we hope this event can help you in some way. Today, we have Hannah Morgan presenting on how to job search after 50. All these sessions are being recorded, so if you miss any important information or just want to rewatch them, we will be uploading all of them to our YouTube channel in the near future. And you can also find those recordings up at jobscan.co/know-fear as we upload them. Before I hand it over to Hannah, I'd like to go over some general rules. So we recommend that everyone have their view on Zoom set to active speaker mode so they can see the presentation clearly. And to ensure that everyone has a good experience free from any distractions, you will notice that we're keeping you on mute and keeping your videos off for the duration of the session. However, with that being said, we would still like to engage with you. So there is a text chat feature in Zoom that I see a lot of you utilizing already. Hello, where you can submit questions to Hannah throughout her webinar, and myself and my colleague Allison will be monitoring that chat and saving relevant questions for Hannah for throughout her webinar. We do ask that you keep your questions to a general nature and related to today's topic, and we will do our best to relay them over to Hannah. Please also save any networking or link sharing until the end of the presentation because we do want to try and reserve the chat for questions. And just one more thing before I hand it over, we are offering a 20% off Jobscan Premium membership for new and free members attending today, and you can find that promo link throughout today's session. But with all of that, I am excited to turn it over to today's presenter, Hannah Morgan. Hannah, thank you for taking the time to present to us today. Welcome, and please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Linda, and thanks, Allison, for monitoring the chat box. My name is Hannah Morgan, and I am a job search strategist. I've been helping job seekers since 2009 understand how to navigate these challenging waves and terrain of job search, because as we know, job search today is not the same as the last time we looked, whenever it was the last time you looked. There have been a lot of changes. And so what we're going to be talking about today is how is job searching after 50 different than maybe job searching when you're in your 30s or early 40s. So that's what I'm looking forward to talking about today. The main areas that I'm going to cover are what are there? Yes, there are. We all know there are advantages to hiring older workers, so I'll review some of those. I'm going to talk about the important 3 steps for job seekers that are over age 50. And then one of the things that I hear so often is that, oh, I'm overqualified. And I want to talk a lot about you're not overqualified, you're uniquely qualified. So we'll take a look at how you can do that and some tricks. And one of the things that Linda said is that, you know, each one of you have a very unique circumstance. And so I do want to answer your questions, but sometimes the situations can be really tricky. And so I'm trying to give it more general advice, but if you do have individual questions, you know, there's information at the end. You can contact me and I can see if I can help. Okay. So let's start off by talking about some of the ways the older workers really are taking the lead in the workforce. Did you know that people 65 years and older are the fastest are predicted to be the fastest growing segment of the workforce? Why is that? That's because the boomers which is sort of the boomer generation, is really those people that are 65 and over right now. They were a very, very large segment of the workforce, and they still are, and they're not retiring. So it is, and the people that may have retired are re-entering the workforce. So that 65 plus is going to be growing. It's also people over age 50 are have the highest level of self-employment. They also, 65 plus, are the most educated. All of these are phenomenal reasons why employers can't let you go today. They don't want you to go. They need you desperately. And because you're filling a lot of vital gaps that are in their workforce, they don't want to lose the institutional and cumulative knowledge that you bring to the table. So let's focus on the good news. So that's some of the great news. And here's my other point. If Madonna, Warren Buffett, Martha Stewart, and the average CEO can be fully employed after age 50, why can't you? Right? If they can, we should be able to do it as well. So let's look at some of the advantages of older workers. One, you all are actually more collaborative and patient. And that is a skill that you've accumulated over your years of work. You've mastered the ability to partner and work well with different departments and groups and individuals, and you're more patient. You have a greater sense of empathy and wisdom with your older years. That's one advantage. Many cases, whether you need to use this or not, people who've been in the workforce have a greater ability to be leaders. You may not always want to continue being a leader, but your leadership experience far outweighs any new grad or mid-level. You've had experience. You've worked under some of the greatest leaders ever, because back in your day, everyone received leadership training. In today's day and age, and for the past 20 years, there's been virtually no leadership training. So you are, if you're over age 50, one of the few generations that left that still has had the opportunity to see what great leadership can look like. That's not to say we all haven't had some not so good leaders, but there's more good in your generation than others. You, because of the number of years you've been in the workforce, have very strong professional connections. And that can be a huge asset to a company that either in a sales capacity or somebody that's looking to build relationships with partners and vendors. That comes at a great value to an organization, because it's very time consuming and risky to build some of those relationships if you don't have any ties. The other advantage you have is that you're not clawing your way to the top anymore. That's not probably most of your goals at this point in your career. Wherever you are, you've gotten to where you are, and you're really sort of happy to be able to share what you've learned and to give back. So there's not that need and desire for you to prove yourself and to be cutthroat and to stab people in the back. So those are some of the most important reasons and advantages that more senior job seekers have. But that data also shows that people who are over 50 stay in jobs longer, take fewer days off, and make more loyal employees. And there's another thing that we noticed today. People who are older workers tend to show up on time, if not early. And when I was talking to Linda, she said that today's webinar was one of the first webinars where so many people were in the waiting room ready to go before the hour started, which really is a testament to your ability to play by the rules. That's the way you were raised. So these are so many of the reasons why companies need you. They want you, they just don't know exactly how they need you, but they do need you. But I want to turn this over to you all, and in the chat, tell me, what are some of the other advantages there are for being an older worker in the workplace? What's the positive part of this? What do you bring that the younger worker doesn't offer?
Feel free to drop your
Confidence. Emotional intelligence is a huge one. Expertise, mentorship, fantastic sense of humor, years of experience, stability, objective. You're able to hit the ground running because of that experience, problem solving, tenacity, calmness, great. Flexibility, critical thinking, temperance, which is like resilience, resilient to changes. Absolutely, because these are all the things you've had a life experience in the workforce. You've seen it all. And look at all of these great things. Thank you all for sharing. I want you to remember all of this, but not just remember it, because this is where I think a lot of the older job seekers fall short. They get so caught up in the fact that they may be their age may be used against them, that they forget that there are so many examples of times where they have been collaborative or demonstrated leadership. This is what I would love you to do. I want you, after this webinar, I know it's a busy day, but after this webinar, I want you to carve out some quiet time. And I want you to think of specific examples of times that demonstrate your ability to be collaborative, your ability to demonstrate leadership, all of those wonderful things, that you talked about, your emotional intelligence, your ability to adapt to change, all of those really phenomenal things. I want you to write down a very specific incidents in your career where you adapted to change, where you were able to shift on the dime, where you demonstrated perseverance, all of those wonderful qualities. Think of a specific example. Now, for those of you that said experience, that's a little bit different. Yes, you have experience, but just having experience isn't a clear benefit, right? Because that doesn't help me understand what you can do and how you can benefit my organization. So if you have experience in a specific area, whatever that area of expertise is you have, I want you to think of a specific time you use that experience to solve a problem, make a difference, have an outcome in your most recent organization and probably in organizations before that. So the challenge for every single one of you is not to just say you've got this stuff, but to pinpoint a specific example of a time that demonstrates that. Because one of the things that you often are not as good at is tooting your own horn. Okay, or taking credit where credit is due. And stories are very powerful. When you use an example, people have to pay attention. They're going to notice. They're going to know exactly who, what, where, when, why, and how you did what you did. And that's what you need to do. That's what I want you to do. So if you take time out after this webinar and you begin recalling some of these stories, you're going to be so much further ahead. I know people are anxious to get to the job search stuff. And so as we sort of stop right here, I wanted to take a quick pause to see if there were questions about those, how you might go about finding out or discovering or mapping out or identifying your the advantages of being an older worker. Anyone have any questions around that? Yes, Barry, stories tell and numbers sell. Yep. Okay, so let's move on to the 3 steps for job searching after 50. And often when I meet with job seekers and train people in classes, the first thing they're interested in is writing their resume. And I say, ho, 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 no, we're not ready to write the resume yet. The first thing that you have to do, and it's more important as an older job seeker than ever before, is to know your focus. You can't be fishing in a pond with the wrong lure. You're not going to catch anything if you don't have the right bait. So you have to be sure about what it is you want to do. And that can often take some time. We'll take a look at that. Step 2 is you want to, there are going to be objections, stigma, biases about you for whatever reason. You want to be proactive in preparing responses and ways to overcome those stigma and biases. And then the last step is to really update your skills and be familiar with some of the new trends that are going on in job search today. So let's take a look at this first step. Know what you want. In the world of job search, recruiters are not matchmakers. They are there to fill a very specific role, and they are looking for somebody who is a 99 to 100% match. That they're pretty picky. And if they can't find that 99% match, they're going to keep looking. Eventually, they may circle back and find those people who were an 80% match or a 90% match, but their preference is to find somebody exactly like what they're looking for. And it's one of the reasons why they're having so many problems today. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this model that is here at Kagi, but it's a really holistic view at how to build, create, develop a career that is specific to what you need and what you want. All too often, we just think about a career in its own separate bubble. And again, I think people over 65 are very used to keeping their personal and professional life very separate. But what we know is that when you can blend your professional and your personal interests together, you're much more satisfied in the role that you are delivering. So let's take a look at this segment right over here, what you are good at. What are the specific skills that you enjoy using? What experiences have you had that really felt good, that you were doing these things and time slipped by and you can't even imagine doing anything else? Who are the customers or clients that you enjoyed working with the most? We all know that there are certain people we don't work well with. There's that problematic client or that vertical that we prefer not deal with. Identify the ones that you do like working with. And then are there processes or procedures related to your occupation or more transferable that you love doing? Right? Are you just that kind of person who could listen all day long to people and provide them with advice or try and direct them in the right route? This identifying what you are good at and what you like to do does take time, but I don't want you to shortchange yourself, because if you haven't thought about this stuff, it's going to be really challenging for you to convincingly tell somebody why you're interested in their job that may or may not have anything to do with what you've done in the past. So take the time to do that. And then the next segment in this circle is, what do you love to do? This is more of your personal passion. What are your interests and priorities and values? What I have found is that, especially today, after the year and a half we've just been through, almost 2 years, our values and priorities and what's important to us have changed significantly, right? So it's important for you to reassess what is important to you from your values. What must you have in your life to make it feel full? What are your values that you're not willing to compromise on? And the other thing that happens as you get later in life, it used to be when you were younger, it was make money at all costs, climb that corporate ladder. For many people, not all people, but that usually was a very typical set of values and priorities. But at this stage in your life, things have shifted a little, and it may not be that money is the most important thing, that having free time to go visit your kids in college or to be able to travel or do things that you've always wanted to do as you sort of ease into retirement, that might be what's more important to you. So it's important for you to highlight that, because if you're choosing a job that pays really phenomenal but doesn't allow you any kind of flexibility in your lifestyle, you're going to get burned out and it's not going to be a long-term satisfying job. The next category is helping you evaluate what the world needs. Now, this isn't always easy to do. You have to sort of stick your feelers out and do do an assessment of what the professional landscape looks like in not only your occupation, but occupations that you might be interested in. And oh, by the way, the broader world in general. What we know today is that there's a huge demand for technology and people who have technology skills. My hunch is that's probably not a lot of people here, but you might have leadership experience in the technology realm. And so that is still in demand. I was just talking with a recruiter today who said they have so many recs for open jobs at all levels in technology, they can't possibly fill them all. And the recruiters are feeling overwhelmed. So clearly they haven't found you yet. So, but what are the world problems that you could put your finger in the dike and be the solution to? Are there shortages of skills or knowledge that you have? Are there specific things that you can do that nobody else can do. Even it's a very small part of what you do. If you have any knowledge of supply chain. We know the world's supply chain is broken. Every company is trying to figure out how to do their supply chain better, more effectively, more cost effectively. So if you have any kind of experience in supply chain, even though it may not have been your full job, that could be that's a skill that's a problem the world needs solved right now. The final assessment that I want you to do is to take a look at what you can be paid for. This is where you start looking at some of the job boards and ads posted on LinkedIn to give you a better sense of the job titles that companies are looking for and the kind of pay that they are offering. That's really important to understand both the job titles and the pay. And that's one of the things, if you've been with a company for a long time, you know what your company called what you did, and you know the pay scales within your company, but you don't have any idea what other people are getting paid. So this is your time to do some research and understand what that all looks like, because you want to find the best fit for you from a job title and pay standpoint possible. There's no need taking 8 steps down the rung on the ladder if you don't need to. So as part of this is understanding, okay, what does the chain of command in this kind of an occupation in a different industry look like? So it will take a little bit of research, not only online research, but talking to people who actually have the kind of roles or hold the kind of roles and work in the types of companies that you may be interested in. And these informational conversations are just that. It's you're reaching out to somebody you may know, you may not know, and say, hey, I have this interest in your field and I'd love to get a better understanding of what goes on. Could we have a quick conversation so I can get some basic information about what a day in the life looks like, or what some of the challenges are you are facing, or what kind of backgrounds work well, or what's the must-have skill that people need in this job, whatever that situation is, whatever you need. But you can only get that from talking with people. So those are all of the really important things that have to happen in that quadrant, in that Ikagi circle, Venn diagram. But there are some other tools that can help you do this as well. If you haven't heard, LinkedIn Career Explorer is a free tool that allows you to explore some of the occupations in your relative to the field that you are already in. So they're alternate job titles that are closely related to what you have done. So if you're just looking to broaden that horizon and get a better sense of what are some of the other job titles I could be considering, LinkedIn's Career Explorer is a great tool. If you want to try something totally new, reinvent yourself, or use some of those transferable skills in a new occupation, then I'm going to recommend a free tool called My Next Move, which is sort of a part of onet.com, but on onet.org, but they have their own website. So you will answer some really interesting assessment questions. Don't overthink it, go with your gut, and then it will give you a code. It's a Holland code, and it will allow you to match that code with different types of occupations. It's one of the closest things to that magic wand. What should I be when I grow up? And in many cases, it's pretty on track. I mean, it's very broad, but if you have not played around with My Next Move and you're thinking about a career change, I would really, really recommend it because it's a super tool. So if we go back and look at this model, were there questions that people had about, gosh, how do I get started? What am I going to do? How does this work? Okay, I'm going to keep moving right along and if questions come up. So we know that there are stigmas. We can call it age bias. We call it age discrimination. We can call it a lot of things. Yes, it exists, and it has existed forever. And there's very little that we can do to change it. And I'm sorry about that. If I could change it, if we could get the president of the United States could change it, if we could get anybody to change it, We would, but it's not something that we have any power or control over. What we do have power and control over is changing the perspective and impressions that we give off that may be clues or tipping people off so that they're jumping to the conclusion or making the assumption that we're an old fart and when we've got all these problems, which we know isn't true. But people judge a book by its cover, and they judge based on first impressions. And so we have a very important role in making sure that we don't give the wrong impression. So these are some of the things that I see most commonly as a reason for age discrimination. You're coming across as too expensive. You're coming across as overqualified. You're coming across as untrainable or set in your ways. You come across as not very tech savvy, or you come across as not being able to fit into our younger culture in the organization. Are there other things that you have seen that sort of give you the sense, or you've heard other people say that give you the sense that you're too old for a job? What are some of the other assumptions that we make?
Feel free to drop your comments in the chat.
While it is cheaper to bring in somebody who's younger, that's not always what the employers are looking for. Yes, they want to save a buck, but they know that the right candidate is worth money. They pay their CEO millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not like they're cheap. They just want to invest their money in the right areas. So yeah, if you're looking at a company and everybody else in the company is under age 40, do you really want to work for that company? Right? That's a personal choice. How well do you get along with people who are under age 40? That wouldn't necessarily be the greatest work situation for you, even if you were to get the job, unless you really love hanging around people who are under age 40. I mean, part of this is your choice as well. Sometimes hiring managers can be intimidating. Who gives the impression that, right? We give the impression that we might be intimidating. So any of these things that you think might be used against you, I want you to write them down, because your job is to cut them off, not allow them to make that assumption. And we're going to talk about that now. How can you convince somebody without them having to meet you or without having a conversation that you're not too expensive, or that you're not overqualified, or that you're not going to be threatened by their lead, you're not going to be a threat to them in their leadership? So let's take a look at some of the ways that you can proactively overcome some of these oftentimes erroneous assumptions. So one of the best ways for you to come across as not too expensive is for you to have a better understanding of what the going rate is for the kind of work you do, or the kind of work that you want to do. So Glassdoor, salary.com, pay scale, talking to people in industry associations, or getting your hands on their salary study and talking to recruiters. If you have done your due diligence, you will have a much better understanding of what the pay rate is for the kind of work that you want to do. And if you were in your job for a number of years, you actually may not be making top dollar. When you've been with a company for a number of years, you generally get a 3% raise. But if somebody brand new is coming in, they oftentimes are getting paid 10 to 20% more. So it's not necessarily that you are expensive, but you give the impression that you are expensive. And how do you do that? Maybe you list every job you've ever had. Maybe you talk about, the big deals that you've closed that are scary to the company because they deal with much smaller numbers. Their budgets are much smaller. Maybe you have put in a salary range on your application that is way out of line. The other thing that I have often seen is that somebody with over 10 years of experience is applying for a job that requires 3 to 5 years of experience. You are too expensive for that job. You are overqualified for that job. If the job only requires 3 to 5 years of experience, even if it's in a different industry and a new role, you're overqualified for that all day long. You would not last. When you're looking at a job that requires 3 to 5 years of experience, a lot of that 3 to 5 years of experience is just coming up to speed in the industry or just learning how to operate in an office environment. You all who have been in the workforce for all these years have a great grasp on how office politics work and how to host a client who visits your site and all of that kind of stuff. Somebody with 3 to 5 years of experience is still newer and coming up to speed with a lot of the basics of the job. You've mastered those, and the company doesn't necessarily want to pay somebody a larger salary for some of those basic skills. You all have beyond basic skills. So those are some of the things that are going on here. If you've done a good job researching the salaries and the different job titles, I think that will allow you to better present when you're asked what your salary requirements are, a range that's much closer to what they're looking for. And if you don't go back and list every job you've ever had on your resume, they're not going to assume that you are expensive. Being too expensive is a pretty popular catch-all for some of these things. Overqualified. So I talked a little bit just now about applying for the right level job, right? And so if you are seriously considering starting in a new industry or occupation, you may have to take a step back. Not guaranteed, but you may want to not keep managing people may not be something that you're interested in doing anymore. So if that should happen, on your resume and in the information that you're conveying, you're not going to talk about your leadership skills because you don't want to be a leader anymore. And if that's not a part of the job requirement, then you shouldn't be talking about things that are more than what the company and the job actually requires or is asking for. In your cover letter, and maybe even in your LinkedIn About section, you could address proactively why you're making this shift. Why is it that you are making this change to a job that is less stressful or a low level job in a new industry? Explain that. Part of that explanation will help people understand that, oh, they're not overqualified, they're making a switch and this is why, which puts them at ease. They won't think that you're just misconstruing or misinterpreting what the job is looking for. You're going to get in there and find that it's too boring for you. Applying for jobs that ask for 3 to 5 years of experience, I mentioned that, those really aren't jobs for you. You're 5+ years, maybe 7+, maybe 10+. Don't highlight the leadership or any advanced technology that aren't part of the job. Anything that you have that is not required in the job probably shouldn't be listed on your resume. It doesn't mean that you're lying. It just means you're not going to openly broadcast that and market those skills when they're not being requested in the job. The other thing that I've seen a lot of people do with the resumes, and I've recommended it for years, is you may choose to cut your resume off at about 15 years, 10 to 15 years of experience. Oftentimes a line at the bottom underneath your experience, additional experience available upon request, is a way to sort of let people know, yeah, there's experience before this, but I'm not going to talk about it here, right? We all have experience. Are you going to talk about the first job you had out of high school? No, it's not relevant any longer. So there are certain things that it's okay not to list every job you've ever had on the resume. It's not important to your next employer. They are most concerned with your most recent job. That's what they want to know about. So if you are pursuing a different job and a very small portion of what you did in your last job is relevant to the job you're applying for, you're going to make that, you're going to be sure to talk about that, right? You may leave out some of the other stuff that's not relevant, but you're going to certainly talk about the accomplishments you had that are relevant to the job that you are applying for. The other thing that can be sort of yucky, and I don't always recommend this, but there are certain circumstances. If you have a PhD in something, and the job requirement doesn't list a PhD as desirable or required, you may not need or want to list it, because typically people who have a PhD do command a higher salary. And that's one way you're saying, hey, I'm more expensive. I would say a master's degree as well. If the job doesn't require master's, or doesn't allude, or doesn't even prefer a master's degree, you're telling them, hey, I've got this advanced degree, which makes me more expensive. And that's another thing that makes you overqualified as well. So I'm seeing some questions come in. Are we doing okay with those?
Yeah, if we want to take some questions right now, we can, or you can feel free to move forward.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving because I think the rest of this might address it. One of the other concerns, bias, stigmas that that employers and recruiters and hiring managers have about older workers is that you're untrainable. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. You're stuck in your ways. So you, in your resume and in your cover letter, should definitely think about highlighting accomplishments, times in your career there where you demonstrate flexibility and adaptability and or emotional intelligence, right? Anytime you worked in a situation that required you to shift on a dime, I want you to make sure that you include that definitely in the accomplishments underneath your most recent job. But if you have similar stories from other jobs, it would probably be a good idea to share those, because you're wanting to send a clear message that I'm trainable, I'm flexible, I'm adaptable, I'm Gumby. What do you need me to do? I can do it. Same thing, another way to show that you are trainable is to list recent training or education. For those of you that may have been unemployed during the pandemic, if you took any courses online, definitely add those to your resume and your LinkedIn profile. There are a lot of people who didn't do any training, and I know it was hard for us to sometimes to concentrate and focus, even if it was self-study on something that was important to you, or relevant to your career. Maybe you read a book. Those are things that, that you'll have to sort of stockpile. But any formal training, I want you to put on your resume and in your LinkedIn profile, as long as it's, even if it's not 100% relevant. A lot of people are getting training right now in DEI, diversity, and inclusivity. What's the E? Equality. I can't remember it.
Equity,
DEI.
yeah.
Thank you, Linda. So if you were proactive and took DEI training, that would be a wonderful thing to say. I'm not an old fart. I'm willing to learn new things. So anything that helps you show that you're a lifelong learner, that you're adaptable, you're flexible, and any examples that show that you're a great team player. You've worked along some people who are not great team players, right? And maybe not everybody is a good team player, but generally, you've had experiences in your life where you have been a good team player. You want to include one or two of those on your resume as well. All of these things mixed together are beginning to send a message to a future employer. Oh, this person isn't just an expert. They're trainable, flexible. They've got, great emotional intelligence. So that's another thing. Tech savvy is really a big misnomer, because a lot of the research has shown that people over age 50 are actually some of the top users of social media and online tools. So I don't know where that came from. I don't think it's as true today as it may have been 10 years ago, but it's still a concern. So your job is to prove them, the manager or the person making the assumption, that you may not be tech savvy, wrong. So highlight that recent technical training that you did. Use social media, especially LinkedIn. It's a great way to show that you're tech savvy. And if you really begin to master some of the intricacies of LinkedIn, you really do come across as somebody who's not clueless when it comes to social media. The other thing that you'll have to take some time to do is to make sure that you're up on the latest business tools and how to use them. A lot has changed, especially with the pandemic. A lot of companies have implemented internal communication tools like Slack to help them stay connected. And there are all kinds of project management tools. Some are, open source, others are proprietary and built specifically for the company. But your job is to have conversations with people in your field of expertise and ask them the question, what's some of the newest technology and with some new apps that you're using that you want to make sure that I'm up on, right? Teach yourself those things. Now, I grant some software you may not have access to because the licensing is prohibitive for an individual, but you can still read about it and learn about it and be able to have a conversation around it without having the hands-on experience. If you, and that's sort of what I'm talking about, how to identify and how you will bridge that gap. Your job, if someone says to you, hey, you don't have this specific software, is to be able to say, I'm aware of that. And what I've learned in having conversations with people who do have that specific software and people who are using it is that it's very similar to this software, which I do have experience in and I'm pretty comfortable using. So I'm sure once I got in there and did some of the company training on the system, I'd be fine. But it's up to you to know where your gaps in technology lie and take initiative and responsibility to bridge those gaps, especially if you are unemployed and looking. You've got a little extra time on your hands, so invest in that because that will go a long way to show you're tech savvy. We talked about this, and I don't believe that you necessarily need to or want to work for a company that's filled with people who are much younger than you. But if you make that decision, you've researched the company, you've looked at the employees on LinkedIn, and you think, oh my gosh, this is ideal. I love this company. I love everything they're doing. And working with young people would be a real boost for me. I'd love that. Then it's up to you to show that you're not it's up to you to show that you can get along well with people of different generations. So as simple as learning how to speak pop culture, right? What's the newest, latest and greatest phase on TikTok, and who are the hottest music artists, and what's going on in the pop culture scene? You don't have to be an expert, but if it is joining a company that's much younger than you should probably, and you may already naturally be doing this. And that would be another reason why you would be a fit, that you already love keeping up with pop culture and what younger people are doing. One of the things that you all talked about in the beginning was mentoring. And I think that being a mentor is a wonderful quality, but reverse mentoring is something that will be a better demonstration that you'll get along well with younger people. Reverse mentoring is where the more senior person is married or partnered with somebody who's a junior partner, and the knowledge sharing is going up rather than coming down. So that younger, fresher, newer worker is explaining information and sharing what they know about technology, apps, whatever it is, efficient ways to do things. They're sharing that information with more senior people in an organization. So that's called reverse mentoring. Anybody with experience can be a mentor. And I think we've all had that experience where we've been partnered with a mentor or we've been mentored by somebody who wasn't really open to understanding where I was coming from. So just being a mentor isn't enough to show that you'll fit into a culture, but being involved in a reverse mentoring relationship does show that you're willing and able to learn from those that are younger than you. And oh, by the way, you come across as being less intimidating or less threatening. If you have interest in things that are high energy or hip, part of pop culture, sorry, include those on your resume, list those in your, LinkedIn profile somewhere. So if you love running 5Ks and you're training for your next half marathon, definitely put that in there. If you're in a CrossFit club or you started a CrossFit group, definitely anything athletic or hobbies that are high, that demonstrate high energy or are youthful or more hip or pop culture, those would all be really great examples. Let me tell you what would not be a great example. The fact that you love crocheting and doing needlepoint on the weekend would not be a hobby that would convey that you're high energy or youthful. Talking about, belonging to a book club as your sole form of hobbies, again, not one of those things that's bad, but it's certainly not conveying that you are going to fit in well with the younger culture. So those are just some things to be aware of. So no, Joseph, you're not in the geriatric club. You're not. Oh my gosh. So, but here's the deal. I want to know more about that. Why do you think these things make you feel old? Is it because do you give off these perceptions or these impressions and you don't know it? Is this the first time that you've sort of seen the mirror in the mirror that you might be coming across as old because you've done some of these things? Or is it that you haven't really thought about it from this angle before? Yeah, classic rock is now from the 2000s. I know. I I'm over 50. I get where you all are coming from, and I understand that this is hard stuff. I'm the first to admit that I am not the hippest chick. And I have worked in a college environment alongside people who are actually much younger than me, in their 20s and 30s. And I'll tell you something, I enjoyed it for a while, but it was hard for me to find things in common, like common interests that we shared. They didn't have kids. I had teenagers. They were going out on the weekends. They were doing fun stuff. I was, worried about going to the next football game. Our lives didn't jive so well. And so while your personal life and your work life are separate, there's a lot of water cooled chatter that goes on. And there are a lot of things that I didn't feel that I could relate to because of my age difference. And so I get that. So the next time around, I don't think I actually would be such a good fit working alongside a bunch of people that are 20 to 30 years old. I learned that about myself. I also worked in a nonprofit and I loved what I was doing there, but I learned that I didn't have a lot in common with the other coworkers that I had that were in the nonprofit sector. Most of them had a master's in social work. I didn't have a master's in social work. Most of them lived in in the urban part of the city. I didn't live in the urban part of the city. So what I realized was that, oh my gosh, I don't have a lot in common with these people besides the fact that I love helping the same set of clients. Part of this is realizing at your point of life, whatever that is, where is your tribe? Where are the people that you feel most comfortable with? That won't be judging you based on age, that won't be looking at you like you're an old fart. That's what we all want to find, our tribe. And that tribe is waiting for you out there somewhere. It's just a matter of talking to enough people and uncovering it. Okay, so there's some other things that I don't want to come as a surprise to you as you're going through your job search. And you may have experienced some of these already, but I was talking with a client the other day and he said, oh my gosh, Hannah, I was so surprised that I had applied for a job. I got the email, but then they sent me a text message too. What is that? Why are they texting me? Like, well, that's the way they're trying to stay in front of you and keep you in the pipeline and stay engaged with you. They're not going to be living on email. They engage with people through text messaging. So there's nothing unusual about that. That's actually becoming the more normal way that recruiters are communicating with candidates. So I wanted to give, if he just recently, within 2 weeks, experienced that and it was new to him, it made me scratch my head like, oh my gosh, doesn't everybody know that that's going on? So if you haven't had any interviews yet, you probably have heard that video interviewing, both one way and two way, is the new way. Companies are trying to get these interviews accomplished, not only because they're safe and the COVID, but it's also a huge time saving. You don't have to commute all the way into the office. You hang up the call and done, and they can take their next call immediately, and you don't have to commute all the way home. So there are lots of advantages to this. Chances are, if you're getting to the final interview at some point in this near future, when we're past COVID, you'll be able to go in the office and meet people face to face and see the office. We're just not there yet. So interviews are the next best thing. One-way interviews are a hot button for a lot of people, where you are just recording your interview and it goes back to the employer, and you don't know, it's just one way. You're recording answers to questions. That can be challenging and frustrating, but I don't want that to catch you catch you off guard or be a surprise to you, because some companies are doing that. And it doesn't mean that the company doesn't care. It's time saving. It's for very legitimate reasons. So don't judge, just take it for what it is. You can make your decision after you've gotten the next interview and you start having conversations with the people. So there are still a lot of companies, and it's easier before than ever to give assessments, skill assessments, as well as other kinds of assessments. So if somebody during the interview process, usually after that first screening interview, says, okay, we've got a couple of assessments we'd like you to do, don't be caught off guard. It's just one more way where they're trying to evaluate your skill level. It's really hard to do that without any kind of assessment. I talked about the texting. The other thing that, if you haven't seen this with your friends and colleagues that are job searching, is that the interview cycle is long. It's taking 5 or more interviews for a variety of reasons. So it's going to take longer and more effort and time to go through this interview cycle. Be patient, be understanding, but don't be afraid to self-advocate and be persistent, because a lot of things can slip through the cracks as you're going through more than one interview. You probably have heard this a billion times, but I'm going to tell you one more time. It's so critical that you match the skills in your resume to the specific skills that are being asked for in that job posting. If you haven't heard of Jobscan, if you're not using Jobscan, it's a really simple way to match what the job is asking for and how well your resume matches up against that. And it's a phenomenal tool. I've been using it with clients for a number of years. So even just give it a try with their free scan and see how much simpler that's going to make your life. Because at the end of the day, employer, I told you this at the beginning, I'm telling you again now, employers want to hire somebody who's got the skills and can come in and hit the ground running. So they evaluate that on paper by looking at how well your skills match what the job is asking for. The thing to be careful about is if you've been in one industry or one company for a number of years, you don't understand the bigger jargon or the other buzzwords that are being used in the industry. And if you're not using the same words, if you're speaking French, but the company and their job posting is speaking German, there's a disconnect. And they're not going to understand that your term is the same thing as their term. So you have to convert to their language so they clearly understand. You do that, of course, without lying. I'm never going to suggest that you lie and exaggerate or fabricate. But if you know that cost savings in your company was called gobbledygook, your company is the only one calling it gobbledygook, don't call it gobbledygook on your resume, call it cost savings, right? The other really important thing for you to do, and we've alluded to this, is make sure that you have a good understanding of what's happening in your industry, your occupation today. be concerned, be actively looking for ways to update your knowledge, whether that is reading industry publications, whether that's attending online conferences, whether it's getting newsletters specifically for your industry or occupation. It's up to you to stay current with what's going on. And oftentimes as we get more senior in our career, we let that lax a little. We figured we knew it all, we know enough to be dangerous, but if we can learn just a little bit more, it gives us the competitive advantage. So let's look at some more ways that you can show that you are not just qualified, but uniquely qualified. When you think about all the things that you have to do to update your resume and your LinkedIn profile, there are a lot of things, but overall, what you want to do is use the research and conversation information you've gained from conversations to show exactly how you match what the companies need, specifically on the resume, more generally in your LinkedIn profile. So I'm a believer in having a generic, or not a generic, a master resume. On the master resume, you would list, and it's just for your use, you would list every single accomplishment that you have ever had under a job. So that when it comes time for you to apply for a specific job, all you need to do is remove the bullets that don't apply, rather than thinking up new bullets that would match at each time. So it's eliminating the material that doesn't apply to the job, and then you've come up with your customized or personalized resume for that job. Now, if you wanted to, you could take all of those bullets from your master resume and put them on LinkedIn, because oftentimes people don't want to be overlooked for certain occupations or opportunities. So if you are sort of in that phase of trying to explore, list everything on LinkedIn. You almost have unlimited characters. I think it's 2,000. It's a lot of space to write that. So put more bullets underneath underneath each job than you would normally have on a resume. And that might be one of the ways in which you can cover some bases. Rather than just telling me, use stories that show that you have what they're looking for. I was interviewing a woman yesterday, and she was telling me that she has very good computer skills. I've got 5 years of experience using a computer. I've used Microsoft and Excel. That's telling me. If she were to change that into a story, last week I had to create a mass emailing, which required that I merge fields from a database, and that mailing was going to be sent out and printed to 50 different customers and 150 prospects. I created the mail merge function and made sure that and the label printout, and made sure that all of that information was delivered by the end of the week. Right. Oh, okay. That's more impressive than saying I have word processing skills or I can use Microsoft Word, right? It's a story. You visualize what it took for her to do that. Oftentimes we have even proof of our success. We may have an article that was published. We may have a photo of us receiving an award. We may have been written up in a newspaper. If you have any proof, why would you not add that to LinkedIn? In your LinkedIn profile, in a couple of places, up above, I can't remember it right now, in the one section, you can publish it up there, or you could embed it underneath a job where it happened. So there, you've got options to actually show samples of work and show proof of your success. And that's something that most people, I'm sure you've noticed, are not doing. You could be one of the few. It's not bragging if it's true. Because if somebody already wrote an article about your success, or a newspaper covered your promotion, then it's not bragging because they wrote about it. You're not writing about it. So I want you to get more comfortable with being more self-promotional. Do not be humble. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, as I'm sure you have realized. The other thing is, if you just tell me that you have 5 years of experience, I don't know what that experience is doing. Don't make the employer guess or assume to figure out what you did. Your job is to tell them exactly what problem you solved or what you did and what kind of an impact that made. What was the outcome that happened because you did what you did? Um, that is really the magic for you to not come across as being old or outdated. It shows that you are not bragging, but you are just taking credit where credit is due. And I want to make sure that you do that, because I worry that you may not. Star stories, I'm sure you've heard of, are really valuable ways to, in an interview, to convey this information, and stories sell. And the reason I am going really fast with these slides is because I'm just looking at my clock now and saying, oh, shoot, time is flying. These are some of the missteps to avoid. The older worker will say on their resume they have over 20 years of experience. The modern worker will say they have 10+ years. Older worker will say seasoned professional. The modern worker spells out exactly the areas of expertise they have. The older worker lists every job they've ever had. They put dates on education, even though it was 15, 20 years ago. And they list education or training that's not relevant. Those are things that we've talked about today, and definitely are a cue and clue that you are an older worker. So with that, I want to tell you that if you want to get some of the resources that I talked about today, and you want sort of a handout of the materials that were mentioned in today's webinar, you can go to this link, and you will be able to get that information. You will be able to download that information. So it talks about how to get clear about what you want to do next, and some of the tools you can do that, some of the stigmas that you can overcome, anticipate some of those biases or stigmas that are going on out there, and how to overcome those. So.
Great, thank you, Hannah. And everyone, we will leave this slide up as we move on to some questions. And I know everyone had a lot of great questions, and we'll try to get to as many as possible if you can stick with us. So a lot of folks had questions about and concerns about applicant tracking systems. Lance asks, how can one get their resume or job application past the applicant tracking system?
You know what, this is Lance, thank you for that question. I would say for the older worker, one of the biggest obstacles for you will be the applicant tracking system. Don't use it. Networking. Remember, one of the advantages to hiring an older worker is that you have a vast network of connections and colleagues. If there's a job that you are interested in, ask somebody you know to introduce you to the person who's doing the hiring, or somebody who works inside the company. I'm suggesting that for a first conversation, before you throw your resume into the applicant tracking system, have a conversation, do everything in your power to find somebody inside that company that can act as an informant or an advocate or a reference, and will give you that. Having that referral or a reference or an advocate brings you to the top of the pile. You're less likely to get lost in the applicant tracking system. That you might learn some skills that you don't have on your resume that should be on your resume. So having those conversations is vital, and the most important thing that an older worker can do to avoid getting trapped in the applicant tracking system.
Yes, absolutely. Networking and referrals are crucial. Valerie asks, how can we develop some of those sought after new skills that companies are looking for these days?
So I think the answer is it depends on those sought after new skills, right? If you want, one of those sought after new skills I'm just going to throw out there is data analysis, right? you can take, there are all kinds of online courses on data analytics and how to use those in your work and develop those skills. Take an online class. And then, oh, by the way, maybe you can do a volunteer project for somebody that you know, a nonprofit organization that you might volunteer with. It's one thing to have the skills. It's another thing to do a project or to actually use the skill. So while you might have the education in it, work just as hard to find an opportunity. Talk to the online school. Are there any projects that you can recommend that I do that will give me a chance to really use some of these skills? Or invent your own project and use the skills. But I will say one of the things that older job seekers have are transferable skills, and we often overlook those. Those are skills like communication, interpersonal skills, and you have those transferable skills at a much higher level than somebody who is younger than you. So don't be afraid to use those transferable skills as an asset.
Leslie asks, how do we identify the companies that are going to value our more senior experience rather than, those companies that prefer the 20, 30, 40-year-olds?
So 2, 3, maybe 4 ways. Number 1, if you ask your network, hey, what's going on inside this company? What's its makeup? If you're talking to somebody, what's the culture like inside that organization? You could ask people. That's usually your best indication to get the feel for what it's like. People won't do that, right? Because it's too hard to ask somebody that question, or they may not know somebody, but that's the best information. You can go to Glassdoor, you can go to other, Indeed might have some information as well in their review site section. You could check out their company website sometimes. There isn't an easy way. I have seen lists out there by companies, and I can't remember who it is. It may be AARP and other companies that created a list of employers friendly to older workers. So if you Google employers friendly to older workers or something like that, there are lists of those companies. I haven't seen anything from 2020 on, so they're 2019 things, but they're probably still true. So there are several different ways to get that information.
Great tips. And we are almost out of time here, so let's just take one more question. Someone asks, I have a large gap in my employment history, 10 to 15 years. What is the best way to address or approach that on a resume or job application?
So it depends where that large gap was. If you can list your work history and stop it right at the large gap. So if you only have 3 years of experience most recently, and then there's the large gap, I would just list the 3 years of experience. And then it depends on what this is. This is where we really get into, you need to talk with a career professional to get you some professional advice with this, because there's so many different situations and scenarios. I've seen people say that they've taken a family sabbatical. I've seen people say they took a hiatus to take care of family emergencies or family matters or personal matters. There are lots of different ways to do that, but it depends on where the gap is and what you actually did during that time and what you feel comfortable sharing. So there are ways to do that. And I think that, hiring somebody that can, or talking to a career advisor somewhere along the lines can give you that information based on your unique situation.
Yes, and Karen said you can put the reason for your gap in your cover letter as well, which is great.
Really good point, Karen. Yes, absolutely. That's great.
Great. And unfortunately, we are out of time today, but I would like to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to join us. Thank you, Hannah, for your presentation, and hopefully everyone walks away with some new job search tactics and tips. If you would like 20% off Jobscan Premium, you can go to the promo link in this slide right here. I believe Allison also dropped it in the chat. That link just gives you 20% off either a monthly or quarterly Jobscan plan, and that quarterly plan does come with a 2-week free trial. Our Know for Your Job Search event is also coming to a close soon, so we just have 2 sessions left. We have one coming up tomorrow on how to make your LinkedIn a recruiter magnet. That might be very relevant to some of you. And we have one coming up next week on how to use Jobscan. And if you want to register for those sessions, you can do so at jobscan.co/no-fear. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And that is it for today's presentation, but Hannah will leave this slide up as folks file out of the webinar, and we will also leave the chat box open for any last comments. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye, Hannah.
Bye. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, everyone.